Here are some quick notes about the start of the Reform movements and what led into them, which is going to be the Second Great Awakening. So the Second Great Awakening starts around 1800, and it's a rebirth of religion or a revival of religious influence, and it's a reaction against what's called the liberalization of religion. So the Enlightenment is all about reason and using thought to come up with ideas instead of faith. And so the Second Great Awakening is a reaction to try and decrease the influence of reason in the church, to really focus on that idea of faith. So we're going to see during the Second Great Awakening, church numbers grow. We're going to see preachers increase, proportionate to the population, of course, but as we get more population, we get more preachers. And the number of churches actually increases throughout the country. The Methodists and the Baptists are going to be two new groups that grow the fastest throughout the United States. So they're building more churches, especially as people start to move west, as well as in the Northeast and the South of the United States. And these churches are going to have revivals, or what they call camp meetings, where, if you can see in the pictures, people come and there are speakers, and usually they're very emotional speakers, kind of like the First Great Awakening, but there's a bit of a difference, where they're really just getting people to think about being saved. So instead of this whole idea of God is holding you over a pit of fire, in the Second Great Awakening, it's really about you as an individual taking charge of your life and deciding that you want to be saved. And so what can you do in order to be saved? And so at these revivals or camp meetings, they were trying to convert people to join their religion. And so they would have mass baptisms in a river nearby and things like that. And they might last for a weekend or a week, and thousands of people would attend. I'm not sure how they heard the speakers without announcement systems, but somehow they did. And they were really influential. So from this chart, you can see that the number of churches, so it starts in the blue lines are 1780, the yellow lines are 1820, and the red lines are 1860. So you can see by 1860, the two tallest reds are going to be the Baptist and Methodist, where you have to think about in the graphing, they had to draw the little lines to show that it would be way higher and really disproportionate, the graph. So about 12,000 Baptist churches, 19,000 Methodist churches, and then comparatively, the third largest would be the Catholic Church, but those were largely in urban areas, tended to have larger congregations, especially the new immigrants of Irish, who are Catholic coming from Ireland. But the Congregational Church is the old Puritan Church from New England. The Episcopal Church is what comes out of the Anglican Church after we split from England. We decided to create our own branch of that. And then, of course, remember the Lutherans from the German Martin Luther coming over. Luther didn't come over. The Germans who came over brought his religion. And German Reformed and Quaker. So we have all of those different religions, but of course the two largest are going to be the Baptists and the Methodists. So it really starts in upstate New York, along the Erie Canal, where the area circled in red on the map. They end up calling it the burned over district, because Charles Finney, as a preacher, is going to give so many sermons, these hell and brimstone sermons, where he's really focusing on salvation for all, but kind of bringing in that emotional idea, similar to the First Great Awakening, but less, similar amounts of hell and fire and things like that. And so you can see the red dots on the maps are where in 1831 they had revivals throughout. So there are a bunch of red dots all along the Erie Canal, near Rochester and Seneca Falls, where that big feminist convention was held by the ladies. And so that's really good. This is what starts the whole movement, is Charles Finney and his sermons. So then the Second Great Awakening from that burned over district up in upstate New York is going to spread along the transportation movement lines from the Market Revolution, and going to spread out west. As people start to spread, the preachers are going to follow the people and try and convince the people to set up new churches and join new churches and be saved as well. So the big effects of the Second Great Awakening are that the Second Great Awakening furthered divisions between class and regions, because if you go back to the map for a second, they don't see as many preachers traveling into the South because those are strongly Episcopal, and also a lot of the upstate New York influence is going to be abolitionist and anti-slavery churches, and so they're not going to be traveling into the South where slavery is still a strong hold on society as well as on the church. So that's really going to separate people. We're going to see the wealthier Eastern denominations like Catholic and Lutheran and weren't affected as much by the movement, but we're going to see the rural areas, Southern and Western were. Of course, in the Southern, they're going to have a different change, similar to what it says in the next bullet point, the split of Southern churches, where you have the Southern Methodists and the Southern Baptists are going to differentiate themselves from the Northern Methodists and the Northern Baptists because slavery. The Southerners are going to use the Bible to justify slavery, and the Northerners are going to try and use the Bible to promote abolition. And so, of course, that's going to foreshadow the whole split of the nation and secession, which should be an E, S-E-C, secession of South Carolina. So the churches and then political parties split, and then the states start to split. The other effects we're going to see women become much more active in the churches as they are able to promote this idea of individualism and salvation for you as an individual. And women are going to be able to be active in that. And we're going to see other new religions born, particularly Mormonism. We're also going to see Millerism and the Latter-day Saints or the Mormons, and then the Jehovah's Witnesses emerged during this time period as well. And the biggest effect of the Second Great Awakening are going to be the reform movements that emerge. Not only the idea of utopian communities or the experimental communities like the Owenites, Robert Owen, New Harmony, the Shakers, the Oneida community, Brook Farm community, all of those, none of which unfortunately survive. But they're really going to focus on no cruelty, no war, no intoxication, no discrimination, no slavery, things like that in their separate groups. And of course, women are going to be prominent because if you can be active in the church and the church is supporting a reform movement, then women can be active in the reform movement. So despite this whole idea of the cult of domesticity where women are not expected to work outside the home after marriage, they're still going to be prominent in reform movements. And that's going to be a huge change for women and help really start the women's rights movement. The other big movement that emerges during this time period is what's called Transcendentalism, which is the idea that, of course, truth transcends the senses, so it can be found by observation. You don't have to focus on the traditions of the church or traditions of society, and you look inside yourself and what observation. You go out into nature and you reason through problems, and God exists in all of those things. And so this is going to help and inspire a bunch of the utopian communities like Brook Farm and the one that Bronson Alcott founds called Fruitland, which is, he's the dad of Louisa May Alcott, who writes Little Women. And of course, this leads to an increased interest and concern for nature. So we have this whole idea of anti-consumerism, of conservation or environmentalism, and the whole idea of the two main transcendentalists, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. So Thoreau goes out and lives on Walden Pond, which is this lovely picture here, and lives in the woods and builds himself a house and lives very simply, and then writes the book, Walden, about his time living out in nature and finding reason in God and truth through all of that. He's also famous for writing on civil disobedience, where he talks about this idea of civil disobedience or nonviolent disobedience, which is going to inspire a number of people down the road, including Gandhi and Martin Luther King. Ralph Waldo Emerson is really going to focus on this idea of self-reliance. Not only do we need to be, as Americans, not reliant on Europe for their culture and ideas, we can have our own, but also you as an individual can be reliant on yourself, personal responsibility, and think of your own ideas and problem solve for yourself. And so these are going to be writers and speakers, and they're going to travel around mainly in the North, because both of them are going to be not active, but abolitionists in a sense, because they kind of believe in the equality of all, but they don't necessarily go out and promote that in their speeches. But they travel mostly around New England and give speeches and promote these ideas, which is in turn also going to help inspire all of those other reform movements. Reform movements that we're going to look at more through the Reformers Project are going to be reforms for the mentally ill in prisons, educational reforms, women's rights, workplace and factory reform, abolition, temperance, and the utopian societies that we've mentioned a little bit here.